what we're going to do is going to go through this really quickly, this reference, and we're going to try and see how many materials we can list here. So anybody can start and just say, I'll start with say, hey, look, there's brick.
Concrete, metal.
Yep.
There's probably clay. That's probably.
That is clay. Yep, you're right. Clay, brick, concrete, iron. I came up with this list here. There's some mortar here in between this clay. And for today, we're going to focus on brick.
There's some moss as well.
Yes, actually not moss, but grime. It's just discoloration. There's nothing living really on this wall. It's just water damage. So I put the green discoloration as well as the white discoloration that you see in here under water damage. So you can make a crazy material out of all this stuff, but for today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna focus on this brick, just the brick texture. And so to do that, we're gonna start looking at our shapes here and what shapes we actually have, and which we're gonna put in our material. So if you look closely, we have our regular brick here. That's our regular brick size. Now we also have this other size brick here. It doesn't happen every other, but it's like here, it's here, maybe a little bit here. So it's kind of randomized. Today we're just going to get a good feel for making different shapes, and then you guys can make it as accurate as you like on your own. So the first thing we need to know when we start is what are our large shapes, which is going to be our regular brick, and what are our medium shapes and our small shapes. Our medium shape is going to be that second shape of brick, or a thinner layer of brick. And the small shapes are going to be all the nooks and crannies and all that we're going to get in there. We're not going to finish this all today. I'm just going to get you guys started and with the procedure of going about blocking this in. So we're going to start with the height map because everything in Designer is better based off of a height map. And I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with height maps. Height maps are not really practical in the in game engines because they waste polygons, and as well as you don't get that Z depth. You can't really texture on that Z plane because it's only a 2D texture that it's deriving out of. It's only a 2D image. So, however, that being said, height maps will derive correctly to your normal switch because there's a normal node. When you plug a black and white image into that, it reads it as a height map. As well as almost any other node boils down to you need a height map to generate content. So that being said, let's start with our height information. Now, this is a gradient from black to white, obviously. But what you may not know is that it is also 0 to 1. 0 being black, 1 being white, and 0.5 being in the middle there. Now on the RGB lightness scale, it is 127 is the middle, and 255 is the top, 0 is the bottom. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Photoshop, but this color picker thing here, this B actually stands for lightness. It's brightness. It's kind of like the same thing. This L is lightness as well, but on a value out of 100 and not a percentage. So we're going to be working mostly 0 to 1, but just so you know, color-wise, 255 would be 1. So I'm going to get rid of this RGB scale just so we can see a little bit better. This is a top-down view of what looks like a sphere, right? So everything in Designer is top-down. We're looking at it as if you were playing Pokemon. I mean, that's a little 3/4, but if you were to imagine it completely straight down, that's what we're looking at all of this like. But you need to be aware of um, what your texture looks like from the side. When you're doing a height map, it derives height based upon your value. So this is what it would look like on the side view. So now when you determine that white is uh, where the white is on your shape, it's going to be higher than there is black. So my example here is if you were to take the value of this down, this shape is going to come down like this. Um, if you go to 0.5, this is what's going to look like. 0, something like that. So jumping between values in your height map is not a good idea. We want to try and make gradual changes in your height map so that you get good, clean, I want to call it topology, but it's not. It's actually height information. So that being said, let's try and go to, oh, and another thing actually before we leave, you guys need to understand how a levels works. If you already know, I'm just gonna go over it one more time. Let me see if I can get the adjustment layer on. Okay, so this levels, is everyone familiar with the levels? Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so we have minimum and maximum down here. So our minimum value and our maximum value. And then we have our low point, low point, high point, and midpoint here. And you can see how this changes our gradient on the left. If you play with this and you play with your midpoint, this is how we're going to determine our height map most of the time. This is how you're going to get nice, tight, crisp shapes is you're going to be adjusting your levels. So the levels adjustment node is going to be something we're going to be using a lot. This is very similar to bump mapping. Yes, not exactly the same, but very close. So let's jump in here. You guys can open a new file. I'm going to open a new file with you. Let's see. I have this little setup so we can look at what the workflow is going to be. So quickly going over this, what you want to do first is establish your basic large shapes, and then second, your secondary shapes. And then you want to isolate important shapes with a binary mask. Binary meaning 0 or 1, black or white, so that you can always come back to those shapes to edit those shapes cleanly. And then adjusting your height information so that it leaves enough room for additional height building. So going back to our Photoshop really quickly, if I were to use all of these colors, well, which all of these values between 0 and 1, you're going to get no space in between here, in between to get any other information in, because it'll either be taking away from your shape or adding to the shape that's just can't go any higher than 255 or 1. So what we want to do is we want to leave enough room for adding and subtracting from our shape. So that being said, let's come back to Designer, and in our new graph, I'm going to start you guys off with, you're supposed to do some outputs here. Let's, do you guys have your outputs? Are they physically based like this? Did you guys choose this when you started? Go ahead and make a new document. Make a new document or a new graph and choose physically based metallic roughness, and then hit OK. That way it gives you your outputs for you. You don't have to make them. To start off, let's put something in this roughness value. We're going to hit this grayscale thing on the right, these parameters. Coloring grayscale, you'll notice that this little dot turns orange if it's color and gray if it's grayscale. This grayscale output for your roughness should almost always be grayscale. We're going to start this with something kind of rough, so up near 1. just so that we can kind of see what's going on in our 3D view when we start adding information. Our metallic map, there is no metal because we're going to be focusing on the brick, so turn that to grayscale, throw that in the metallic. See what I'm doing? I'm dragging this uniform color node into the graph to spawn these nodes. So this base color, what we're going to do, actually, a really neat thing with Designer is if you take this window, I'm going to go back to this reference here. So if you take this Designer window and just kind of like make it smaller, there's a little eyedropper here. Click the eyedropper and you can actually explore out of the window and pick any color you want on your monitor. So try and get a good basic brick pick of a color. That's very useful with your reference. Make sure your reference is always side by side when you're working. So let's put that in the color. All right, now we got something showing up in our 3D view. A little bit better than that black. To get a good base start, I'm going to let you guys in on a little hint here. Under generators, there's patterns. Go down on the patterns thing and choose this brick generator. Just kind of drag it into your graph. This is a great start for brick. There's a lot of other alternative starts as well that you might find are better suited for your reference. For now, we're going to use this one. Go through your instance parameters and start defining what this brick is going to look like, you know. But always remember that black and white is going to be your height map. Okay, so black is the lowest point and white is the highest point. So that being said, let's throw that into the height. You're not going to see anything change because our settings aren't correct yet. We're going to throw a normal, so drag this normal node out into the graph as well. It reads height information, and keep it on DirectX. We're going to work in DirectX and OpenGL. There's different ways the GPU reads your vertexes. So throw that in the normal node, and we're going to leave that. We're actually going to pump this up a little bit. So if you can see in this 3D view, we kind of have a little bit of form. I'm going to pump this up to 3 though. So pumping that up to 3, we can kind of see a little bit more in our 3D view. And remember that holding Control and Shift and right-clicking and panning can move your light, so you can kind of really see that form. What we're going to do now, I'd like to set up this material to use our height map on our 3D cube. So you guys got to follow along here to get this correct. So make sure everybody's watching here. Go under Materials, under Default. You can hit, you go to under Definitions. And then this checked one should be your physically metallic roughness, which is what we chose for our graph. We're going to go down to Tessellation and click that. And it'll prompt you with parameters here. Crank this height up to 64. This tessellation factor, it's actually how many polygons are going to be on this cube that you can tessellate. And then the scale, put it up to 1 for now. And you can see it change on the cube in your 3D view. And so now that we see this, I want you to drag over the noodle that goes to the normal and hit delete. And you can see that it's no longer reading as a form at all. That's because vertex normals are all going in the same direction, which is straight out, and you can't see any form. So without a normal, you have almost no form in your on your box. So remember that you want to try and work with a normal node at all times. While you're working, kind of maybe drag around the normal node and just kind of double click and look what it looks like. So as well as it being a height, so when you double click on a node, you can see it in your 2D display here. As well as it being black and white, being your height map 0 to 1, it's also going to be good start for masking areas out. Now, in this reference, we have grout which is going to resemble our black area here, and the brick is going to resemble our white area. You can think of it as positive negative space. Except the negative space now is going to also be positive space when we're finished. So you guys can take a minute to just adjust your bricks here to try and get it close to the reference. This node isn't the best for this reference specifically because of those smaller shapes are going to be easier to do with another node, but I'd like to show you this node just for time-wise to get everything in. So remember that this is going to tile. So if you hit the space bar on your 2D view, you can see it tile. When you enter odd numbers into the bricks here, brick count, so 5 and 7. So if you go down to, I should have a color option here. Slope, here, that'll work too. So if you put your slope down or up, doesn't really matter, just so you can see it change. Let's do it completely. Here we go. So when you look at it tile, hold on, middle size here. Okay. When you look at a tile and it has odd numbers, it's gonna put the same texture right now, the same brick right next to it. So the tiling isn't correct. You want to keep to even numbers so that we can tile correctly. So whatever you choose for these numbers for inputs for the brick, make sure they're even so it doesn't place the same brick next to the same brick when it tiles. Always be checking your tiling the entire time you're going through this. For the purpose of this, I'm going to make this 8 and this one's going to be 16. You can play with this to try and get it where you'd like it. At the beginning, the roughness of metallic and flat colors right now. Metallic, there is no metal in this so far, so it's black. Black means no, white means yes. 0 and 1 as well. And then for the roughness, I chose something closer to 1, closer to 255. So I chose like around 200 so that we can just kind of see our form in the 3D view here. Now, you guys can kind of play with the brick texture to get it how you like it. But notice when you put slope on this, it says slope for a reason because you're putting a slope to the bricks by adding a gradient here. It's referring to the height map, the slope, when you put gradients on. So you can't think of it as just black and white anymore. You got to think of it as your form. Substance Designer helps with that a lot by labeling things like slope. So if you take the balance up or down, it's going to select random bricks. It'll push it more or less. Same thing with the variation. If you crank your variation up, it'll kind of randomize which bricks are coming out and going in and what directions. All right, so for now we have our large shapes. We're going to get a little bit of variation in here for now. There's a lot of other nodes that you can use for brick textures that have a lot more parameters that allow you to really customize what's going on in this information. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make some room. We're going to make some room to add and subtract some stuff for future use. Because right now we have 0 and 255. There's no room to add or subtract anything else in our value scale of 0 to 1. So in here, we're using this entire scale so far right now. So we're going to just take our max down on a levels node. Now, what I did to spawn this levels node was I just kind of grabbed this levels thing up here, and I dragged it into the graph. You can also hit the space bar and type levels. Remember that all these nodes up here are atomic nodes, is what they're called, and they're the root, the very most basic form of node you'll get here in Designer. So think of them as like just a little block and a block of Legos, and you're putting together an entire piece with all the Lego blocks. So we double click on the levels, we're going to adjust it. We're going to kind of take the minimum value and the maximum value. We're going to pinch it like this. So now we have all this room to play with different shapes. Now, if you want, you can throw this into the normal node, and you'll see it adjust, and it'll adjust for your height as well. If you throw it into the height, you see how that difference there. If I undo and redo, you can see the difference in height because of the values that it's using. So first thing we want to try and do after our shapes are kind of defined is because this secondary shape information should have been defined in your tile generator as well. So I'm going to move on to this third point here of isolating important shapes with binary masks. So from this information we have black and white, but there's a bunch of gradients in here and stuff too. So we're going to spawn another levels node, and we're going to pinch these values even more. We're going to create a mask from this height information. Binary mask, black and white. So instead of changing the minimum and maximum values that we use in this node, we're going to use the top sliders to define, to push and pull values. So notice when I take this up, this black grout area is growing. So it's potentially hiding our brick forms. So if I zoom in here, we want to try and get this nice and tight. So wherever you want your brick to begin and end, you can see that it's changing here. And if you really wanted to see it in 3D view, you can hook it up. Now, cool thing here is if you hold shift on an output and click, you can grab this and relocate all of these noodles to here. That's with shift, if you hold shift. So you can see what you're doing. Now, remember, this isn't going to be a height map, though, so I wouldn't put it into your height information. It's just to see your growing and shrinking of the mask that we're doing. So we would want to leave, let's try and leave this black all the way at the bottom here. We want to try and get as much brick as possible. And again, this is completely based upon your reference. So if you go back to your reference, how big is the grout compared to the brick, you know? So start defining that space with this mask here. So you want to bring it something like really tight and define an area that looks like it's similar to the reference and it reads correctly. Now, you don't want to get it completely on top of each other, you know, the black and the white sliders, but get it close. Now, we're going to introduce a blend node here really quickly so that we can define in color what's our brick and what's our grout. So I'm going to grab this blend node from up top, and we're going to pick a couple more colors from this reference. So let's grab, you can duplicate your uniform color by hitting Control D, and then use the little picker tool to grab another color, something different than you picked before. You know, something that you think is going to be a good overall base start for your color map. So maybe something a little darker, so we have lighter and darker here. So I like to kind of stack these before, because I know what I want to do in my head. So I kind of put together little formations like this, like, okay, this color and this color are going to be blended together with this blend node. So let's drag our noodles into here. So remember, this blend node, our top is our foreground, our bottom is our background. And we can also define an opacity mask down here. So if we took our output of our mask that we just created with this levels, and we throw it into the opacity mask of this blend and double click on the blend, you can see that it's assigning based upon the values in this levels where our colors are going. So our background input will always be defined by the black in the opacity mask, and our foreground will always be defined by our white in the mask. So now that we know where this is going, we know that, okay, maybe that's not a brick color. Let's try to pick something like a grout. So let's go back to the pick and get a good base color for the grout. Now we got all this crap in here, this white water damage, moss, whatever you want to call it, fungi, and then you also have dirt in here too. So it's not gonna be correct no matter where you go, because it's got all sorts of materials layered on top of the grout. So get something that you think is a good balance. I'd say something like this. And now you can see that we're assigning our colors correctly. Let's throw the blend into the base color and see it on our texture here, on our material. Okay, so far so good. Now, something with the height map, let's go back to our height map really quickly. You can see these hard beveled edges here, and it's creating this really stylized effect. Now, if you wanted something stylized, it's completely up to you. It's whatever art direction that you're going in. However, based on our reference, these aren't that harsh of lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to spawn a blur. So if you could search for blur, you can grab the blur from up top. Right now, I'm going to use a regular blur. We don't need anything in high quality just yet. I'll explain the difference in that. Actually, I'll explain the difference in that right now. So there's a blur high quality, and there's a blur, regular blur, and there's also a blur high quality that's color. So anything red is going to be for your color nodes, and anything gray is going to be for your grayscale nodes. So just keep that in mind while you're picking from your atomic nodes. This blur high quality, now we're working in 2048, and that's our working resolution. So you can really get down to like a pixel level and get some really nice detail in there. So things that require more detail, you would want to use your blur high quality and throw this quality parameter all the way up to 1. That'll help when you're establishing normals from this. So if I took a normal and I threw this into here and I really cranked it up to like 50, take this blur down. It's a little too blurry. So we're just going to blur the edges of this just a tad bit. But you'll start seeing how the normal reacts. See this little stretching here? And that's with the high quality. You know, imagine the low quality. Let's put this on the same. So this is 2. Let's put our other blur on 2 just to prove a point real quickly. Put this in here. You can see how it's really starting to get pixelated, you know, if you use that low quality blur. You know, and then here's the high quality. Here's the difference. So that's the difference between the two blurs. It's up to you which one you want to use. I'll use the high quality. I could just delete. You could delete that normal node if you were following along with that. So we're going to blur these edges just a little bit. And let's connect this to our levels so that it goes down the pipeline into our height and normal maps. Now, let's click back on this blur and adjust it accordingly. Okay, so we're going to just kind of adjust it so that it's not as harsh. It's a little better. Okay, so that's good. So that's kind of our form for the brick is going to be. Everything's going to be very blocky when you're first starting. So our next move is to try and figure out the distance between this grout and the brick, height-wise. Here it looks like the grout is sitting pretty far back away from the height. See that? And then in here, it looks like it's almost on the same plane. So let's try and raise this grout to make it a little bit closer to the height of our brick. So how do we affect something without affecting what's attached to it in the other node. So this whole node has both our brick and our grout in it. Well, we come to our mask. We made a mask for the grout. So let's pull out a blend, and we're gonna try and subtract the brick away from the grout here. So subtracting is a layer blend technique that you could use in Photoshop as well, but it's good for this blend node. It takes your positive shapes and it subtracts it from the other positive shapes in the background. So your foreground input is going to be subtracting its positive shapes, so from the positive shapes of the background layer. I'm going to explain more visually. I know we're all artists here. It's better to kind of visually explain it. So if we went here to this blending mode and we went down to subtract, it's subtracting our positive values from the other positive values. So if you double click on your input here, if you double click on that, you can see what you're putting in. Double click on the background, you can see what you're putting in. See that? And then you double click on the node, you can see what's going on, what's affecting it. So we get something like this. Okay, that's isolating our edges around everything. That's not really what we're going for. We're kind of just trying to isolate this grout. Now I could just invert this and use this. However, I kind of want to make it a little bit more blurry, make it blend together a little bit better. So let's invert this brick here, so we get mostly positive where our grout lies, and put this back into the background. Into the background. So the invert node is up top, or you can search it in the space bar, whatever you'd like. So now you can see this effect of, oh, hey, we're getting, in the middle of our grout, we're getting a higher value than we are around the outsides. We're creating a little bit of form to this grout. So that's a good start. Now we might want to run it through a blur because it's a little sharp. So again, to check out our form, let's take a normal node, crank it up pretty high, crank it up to 20, and put this in here, and we can see what's going on with our height map. Now this is really sharp for grout. So let's try and blur it. Grab another blur. You can duplicate the one you had before. That works. I like using high quality blurs. And you're gonna soften out this grout line. Now, OpenGL is better for viewing in normal. You can see what's kind of, well, for me anyway, because your white shapes, positive shapes, look like they're coming at you rather than receding. So it's easier to see from the OpenGL statement. But our graph is going to be DirectX. So whenever you plug it into the normal, make sure it's in DirectX. So you blurred that and it got a little bit better. But now it also blurred areas outside of our mask. So to tighten up, just tighten up our form, we're going to spawn another blur. And this time, we're going to use that mask that we derived out of the levels to cookie cutter this shape out. So we're going to take these positive shapes, and we're going to subtract them. Again, use another subtract. And so here is now our new grout form so far. And again, if you don't like it, come back to your blur. You can adjust it however you'd like. It gets a lot softer of a form. So from here, we've now defined our grout in positive space. Now we got to blend it with our bricks. So let's take out one more blend here, and we're going to use a blend technique called max. Oops. Then from there, let's put it into our outputs, and we can see what's going on. Whoa, what happened? Okay, well, it's just really high. That's all it is. So to adjust it, let's take another levels to adjust our scene here, or our grout. take a levels node, and just bring down that maximum value. Now, to see it happen in real time, you can just connect it first and take down that maximum value. Yeah, to something that's more believable. All right. All right, so I've ran out of time about 5 minutes ago. So this was a basic understanding of starting to get masks, binary masks, to work for you in your height map and height building. It's a good start for that. Now, obviously, you could go crazy with it and start making it really close to the reference. And remember that uniform color is great for picking colors to start. Use a normal node to see your forms while you're using your height map, and try and keep everything organized. One more thing before I let you guys loose here. First of all, you don't have to stay here, so I don't know why I'm letting you do anything. But if you drag over some nodes and right click, you can go down to add frame, and you can start organizing your nodes like this. And you can start saying that this is your color, and you can also change the color of the little box. And this is how you kind of stay organized. You can also right click and add comments places. And there's a thing called pins. When your graphs get really heavy and big, you can do a navigation pin, and I'll show you what happens there. You just spawn a couple navigation pins. If I can spawn another one. Hold on. Duplicate that. So if you hit F2, I believe it is. Yeah, you can zoom between your pins, and you can navigate your graph that way if you label your pins and all that. So that's how you stay organized. But all right, cool. I'm gonna throw that lesson on the Facebook. I'm gonna throw this in the Facebook. So if you really wanted to see this little dinky example again, that'll be there for you. So hopefully that gets you started and a little bit more comfortable with using height information to start building forms, and then you'll start getting stuff really quickly. Actually, if you just start playing around with things, let me show you an example really quick. This is my bark texture I did in Designer, and this is my graph. Now, this is a medium-sized graph. I'd even say it's a small graph from what I've been doing. But you could see how I labeled everything from shape generation, the large shapes here. I also have my medium shapes in there too. Then I started defining where my cracks are going to be and the ripples. So if you look close, you can see little ripples. So large, medium, small shapes. Then the bark formation I pushed a bunch of values around to get the bark formation that I'd like, with all those shapes combined. And then here's my height output, my ambient occlusion output. We didn't go over ambient occlusion just yet. My normal output derived straight from my height map, so one normal node. Roughness information, which was derived from mostly my height information. Now, bark doesn't require a whole lot of roughness information as it is, and then out here I just kind of left this my base color setup. It's got a bunch, again, deriving mostly from the height. So the reason for me showing you height information is because it's very important for Substance Designer. It's what everything can thrive off of. So that answers your question about the graph here. You can always see it on my portfolio. But I'll end this session with people to follow on ArtStation, actually, because I'm not a pro, but people like this guy are. This is Daniel Tiger. He works for Bungie, and he is an art director. And what he does is he directs art as well as makes materials, tiling materials, in Substance Designer. This guy is absolutely incredible. So shout out to him. And then there's also Rahulio from Naughty Dog. If I can spell his name correctly. Is it a J? You know what? It's probably right here. There he is. Okay. It's a G. Huh. this guy too, if you go to his portfolio, he's another senior environment artist. He's an art director, and he makes materials as well. And works for Uncharted, obviously, because he's from Naughty Dog. But look at the information you can get, like insane amount of detail. He doesn't show his maps or his graphs as often, but sometimes people will. It also depends on the workflow of your development team, because you're passing this file in and out of a bunch of people. So organization is however the team wants it. But look, you can get all sorts of detail in here. All of this is done with nodes. Here's some stuff on a graph. He created these nodes here. This RO dirt, RO height. He created these by himself to help his workflow. Again, you can create your own nodes and use them in your graphs and stuff like that. But